What if a ring once forged by angels slipped into the hands of a shadow? What if a servant of fire once whispered to the throne of a prophet, and the throne listened? What if the night that followed was not dark, but hollow, as if the stars themselves had turned their faces away? Close your eyes. There is a story buried beneath the stones of forgotten kingdoms. It begins not with war, but with silence. The kind of silence that settles over a city when every prayer feels unanswered and every dream leaves behind a trace of ash. They say Solomon once ruled not only men, but the winds, the beasts, the birds, and the Jinn. His command reached into the unseen. His voice was law even among those who did not bleed. But power, no matter how sacred, leaves a shadow. And in that shadow lived a being no one dared name aloud. A Jinn king, ancient as the ruins beneath the earth, whose breath once warmed the fires of rebellion. He had bowed once, long ago, but never truly knelt. This is the story of that Jinn, and of the ring he dared to steal. It is not a tale of monsters or miracles. It is a memory stitched into the seams of the wind, carried from the mouths of mothers who hummed it to their children beneath oil lamps, too afraid to say the end out loud. And now, in this stillness, it comes to you. If you're still here, perhaps this story was meant for you. Tell me in the comments where you're listening from tonight. And if your heart feels called, press like and subscribe so the next untold chapter finds you. There was a time before Solomon, before scrolls were sealed and rings were forged, before mountains echoed with the names of kings. There was only the earth, wide, empty, aching. The sky had not yet learned to grieve, and the Jinn walked freely between the roots of trees and the veins of stone, not yet chained, not yet named. Among them there rose one unlike the others. He did not chase the smoke or revel in illusions. He listened, he watched. And in the deep deserts where fire kissed the horizon, he whispered ancient names back into the soil, as if waiting for one to answer. His name was not given, it was taken. Taken from the language of flame, from the heat of the sunless places. He was called Sacher by those who feared him, but the wind knew him only as the first fire that bowed. In the earliest hours of his memory, Sacher had seen the shape of angels bowing to a new creation. A creature of dust, fragile and slow, yet touched by the hand of something that even Jinn could not fathom. He had not knelt that day. He had turned away. But in the centuries that followed, he did not walk. He did not curse. He wandered. From the drowned cities of the east to the hollow mountains of the west, Sacher sought something older than fire, older than light. He sought the truth of what made the dust so beloved, and it was in this wandering that he first heard the name Solomon. It came on the breath of a night wind in a place where stars blinked like tired prophets. A name soft and firm all at once, like a river that carved its own laws into stone. Solomon. A man not just of command, but of permission. A man to whom even the birds lowered their wings, not from fear, but from awe. Sacher stood on the edge of a canyon then, where caravans stopped only to weep. And the wind carried stories of a ring, not gold, but light, pressed into a circle. A gift from the heavens, they said. A seal no Jinn could cross, and yet all Jinn were bound by it. He did not believe it at first. He thought it a trick of men, a tale woven to keep children from wandering too far. But then the winds changed. He watched the sky itself obey a man's voice. He saw the trees bow without trembling. He felt the fire within his own chest grow still when the name Solomon was spoken. And in the stillness, something stirred. Not rage, but memory. Long ago, before the command was given to bow, Sacher had wandered into the cold void between submission and silence. He had not rebelled. He had simply waited. But now, the heavens had given another man the command he once denied. And that man was building a throne not just of stone but of obedience, of knowing, of harmony with what lay beyond the veil. Saka felt the fire in him crack. For the first time, he descended to the realm of men. He moved like a shadow between tents and palaces. He wore no form, only presence. And wherever he passed, dogs whined, lamps flickered, and the bones of the earth remembered their oldest fears. In the courts of Solomon there was laughter, there was wisdom, there was peace, and the peace burned. Saka watched from the edge of sight as the prophet king commanded wind to rise, as he asked the birds for news of distant lands, as he called upon the Jinn to build towers in silence, each stone laid with verses no man dared speak aloud. Saka did not speak. He watched. And Solomon? He never turned his head, as if he knew. As if the shadow lingering behind his throne was not a stranger, but an echo long expected. The ring glowed faintly on Solomon's hand, not with power, but with remembrance. It was not forged for control. It was made to remind. And Saka, the first fire that bowed, who had wandered the edges of the divine for centuries, felt something deeper than fire. He felt the ache of having been passed over. Not cursed, not punished, just passed. He vanished before dawn. But the wind knew he had not left in peace. He had left in hunger. Not for vengeance, not for war, but for meaning, for a place in a world where even fire must kneel. And so he began to wait again. But this time, not in silence. This time he would speak, not in the tongue of fire, but in the whisper of temptation. And somewhere beyond the dunes, where the night never fully ended, the first plans of defiance began to stir. The night that followed was unusually still. No wind, no owl cry, no stirring of date palms. Even the stars above Jerusalem seemed dimmed, as though watching, waiting for something beneath them to unfold. Solomon, servant of the Most High, sat beneath a canopy woven with silk and sky. The ring upon his finger pulsed with a warmth not of fire nor of metal, but of memory. He had not moved for hours. His lips whispered no command. His voice, which had once ordered oceans to open and stones to speak, remained hushed. 'Cause he felt it. The shadow, not merely near, but listening. Behind the marble columns of his temple, beyond the golden cypress trees that shimmered like guardians of paradise, something ancient breathed softly through the stones. It had no scent, no sound, no shape, yet it was there. And Solomon, though unafraid, lowered his head in silent prayer, for he knew who had come. Saka had not entered, not fully. He lingered at the edges, not like an enemy poised to strike, but like a forgotten brother waiting to be noticed. He watched the prophet's stillness and mistook it for disdain. He watched the peace of Solomon's court and mistook it for arrogance. The fire within him, long quieted by the centuries of wandering, began to curl again, not wildly, but deliberately, a slow, sacred burn, not of rage, but of rejection. Why had this man been chosen, he thought, and not I? Had he not roamed the earth in search of the Creator's echo? Had he not waited while others rebelled and vanished into ruin? Was silence not also a kind of obedience? But silence had brought him no closeness. Only distance, only exile, only the ache of fire with no form to warm. And yet Solomon, son of David, raised among men, called beloved of God, had been gifted the voices of creation. Wind, beast, Jinn, even the things unseen, while Saka, who had never bowed, was now made to obey with chains he could not even see. This was not justice. This was loss. And the fire in his chest trembled like a question too long unanswered. He turned away from the temple, not in retreat, but in decision. He would not stand at the edge of Solomon's presence again. He would find the ring, not to destroy it, but to test it, to know if the seal that bound his kind was as eternal as it claimed, and if it was not, then it did not deserve to exist. So Saka began to walk among his own once more. The Jinn, scattered across mountains, oceans, ruins, and shadows, stirred at his approach. They remembered his name, not because he ruled them, he never had, but because they feared his silence. He had been the first to refuse, but not the first to fall. That made him dangerous. Among Jinn, names carry weight only when spoken in secret, and his name was never said aloud. They gathered beneath a ruined city carved into black stone where sunlight had never reached, and the bones of older worlds whispered from the walls. They asked him nothing. They bowed, not out of loyalty, but because the fire in his voice had returned. He spoke not of war, but of possibility. He did not curse Solomon, and he questioned him. He did not bellion him. He whispered about remembrance. Have you forgotten, he said, the time before the ring? Have you forgotten what it meant to be unbound, to speak without fear, to move through the world unseen, untouched? They had, and his voice brought it back. He told them that Solomon's seal was not just a ring, it was a forgetting, a silence placed upon their tongues, a song they were no longer allowed to sing. And as he spoke, the fire in his chest grew stronger. Not brighter, but deeper. It licked the corners of his being like a secret returning home. They did not cheer. Jinn do not cheer. They listened, and that was enough. From that night on, whispers moved beneath the earth. Tunnels were carved not with hands, but with breath. Stones shifted without sound. Even beasts in the forests began to grow uneasy, sensing that something ancient was remembering itself. But in the high courts of Solomon, peace still reigned. He walked among his people. He judged with justice. He prayed with trembling. And at night, he gazed at the stars not as a king, but as a servant. Yet still, the ring began to dim, not in power, but in clarity. There were nights it grew heavy, too heavy for a finger, too quiet for command, and Solomon, who spoke to the birds and the winds, began to dream of fire again. In one dream, he saw a desert split in two, but not by water, but by heat. On one side, a garden. On the other, a voice. And the voice did not shout. It did not scream. It simply asked, why him? Solomon awoke with sweat on his brow and silence in his room. He knew Saka had not gone. He had only just begun. And the first test of the ring was coming. It happened on a day when the skies were clear. The sun, warm and golden, spilled across the courtyards of Jerusalem like a blessing. Children ran barefoot through the gardens. Doves circled the towers that the Jinn had raised stone by stone in quiet obedience. The scent of myrrh and cedarwood lingered in the air, and the people said, "Peace has a scent here." But peace, like smoke, can vanish without warning. Solomon stood by a fountain shaped like a lion, its waters glistening like pearls beneath his gaze. The ring rested upon his hand as it always had, firm, silent, eternal. And then a servant arrived, trembling, pale, eyes wide as if they had looked upon something not meant for this world. "My lord," he whispered, "he has come." Solomon said nothing. He simply turned. And there, at the edge of the marble court, barefoot and burning in presence though he bore no flame, stood Saka. He wore the shape of a man, tall, veiled, eyes like molten glass. But even the dust beneath his feet seemed unsure whether to accept his weight. Solomon dismissed the court with a glance. All who remained were wind and silence. "You have no right to stand here," Solomon said, voice soft, but firm as the ring itself. "I stood long before these stones were carved," Saka replied, "and I did not come to beg." "Then why?" Saka stepped forward, not with force, but with prophecy. "To ask," he said, "to ask what you were asked, to test what you were given, to see if the one who commands all can stand without the seal he wears." Solomon watched him. The wind began to shift. Birds in the distance cried out and flew as if fleeing from something they could not name. "You seek the ring," the prophet said. "I seek the balance," Saka replied. "You wear the remembrance of heaven. I carry the silence of its shadow. Why must only one be allowed to speak? Solomon removed his hand from the hilt of his robe. The ring glinted, faintly. It is not for power, he said. It is for mercy. It binds not just Jinn, but men. It is the weight of restraint. The remembrance that we are all servants. Saka tilted his head, a smile hidden behind centuries of silence. And let us see, he said softly, if mercy survives the test of absence. And in a moment, swift as breath, the ring was gone. No clash, no fire, no battle, just gone. Solomon stood still, his hand bare, his gaze unwavering. Saka did not run. He vanished, not in darkness, but in light. He left no mark on the stone, only silence. A silence so deep the air bent around it. And with him, he carried more than a ring. He carried a key, a question, a fracture. The moment he crossed beyond the temple gates, the sky began to dim. Not fully, but enough. Enough that the animals grew restless. Enough that the trees whispered. Enough that even the Jinn in their hidden places stirred, sensing that a boundary had been broken. And Solomon knelt, not in despair, but in prayer. He did not chase. He did not command the wind. He bowed to the silence, for he knew that a test had been allowed, and that to reclaim what was lost, he would first have to lose more. Saka did not flee into chaos. He descended into the oldest caverns of his kind, deep beneath the salt deserts, where fire sleeps and time folds in on itself. There he held the ring, and it did not burn him. It did not resist. It rested in his palm like a question unspoken. He stared at it for what may have been hours, days, or the breath of a single sigh. And the fire in him whispered, "What will you do with the remembrance of heaven?" He placed it upon his finger, and the Jinn bowed, not out of love, out of recognition. A new order had begun, not yet declared, but felt like tremors before a storm. But something was missing. The ring pulsed, but it did not glow. Its light was dimmed, its voice silent. For the ring, though worn, had not accepted its bearer. It remembered the hand of Solomon. It remembered obedience whispered with love, not force. And now we waited. And far above, in the place where prayers gather before they reach the throne, the angels turned their gaze once more to earth. Not in wrath, but in sorrow, because something sacred had been touched by hands that remembered exile more than worship. And the wind carried the sound of fire breathing. Not burning, breathing. And the story, once bound in peace, began to unravel, thread by thread. The sun rose that morning, but the light felt thinner, like it had traveled too far to reach them. Jerusalem did not know, not yet. The market still opened. The bakers still kneaded the dough. The children still raced through the alleys chasing birds that no longer sang. But the silence was there, beneath it all, heavy, pressing, hollow. Solomon had not spoken since the ring vanished. He sat alone in the upper chamber of his court, a place once alive with the voices of Jinn craftsmen, heavenly reciters, and wind-carried messengers from distant lands. Now there was only the sound of stillness. No birds came to report. No beasts stirred beyond the walls. Even the trees near his window leaned away, their leaves drooping like eyelids that refused to wake. The ring was gone, and with it, something deeper than power had departed. A thread that held the seen and unseen together. Servants whispered behind doors. Some said the king was ill. Others believed he had been visited by a judgment too sacred to speak aloud. But none dared enter. For even without the ring, the presence of Solomon filled the chamber like smoke from a hidden fire. He had not wept. Instead, he listened. To the silence. It was not empty, no. It was full of questions. Why had the Most High permitted it? Why was the ring allowed to pass into hands that once refused to kneel? But Solomon, son of David, knew better than to demand answers. Prophets do not command the divine. They await it. Even when waiting feels like exile. And so he sat listening. In the hidden corners of the city, the Jinn that once served him grew restless. Some whispered of returning to their old ways, crafting illusions in caves, misleading men, raising forgotten idols from the dust. But others remained still, unsure. The ring's light had not been extinguished, just displaced. And in the shifting silence they wondered, would the fire consume the ring, or would the ring extinguish the fire? Far beneath the earth, in a chamber no human had walked, Saka sat before a mirror of obsidian. The ring was on his finger. It shimmered faintly, like a lantern unsure of its purpose. He had worn it for 3 nights and 3 days, and in that time he had spoken no commands. Not because he could not, but because he would not. Power meant nothing if it did not first listen. And he had waited too long to waste his moment on parlor tricks or prideful displays. Instead, he whispered to the ring, not orders, memories. He told it of the day he first saw Adam rise from dust, of the feeling in his chest when the command to bow was spoken, and his fire recoiled not in defiance, but in confusion. He spoke of wandering, not to escape punishment, but to find purpose. He spoke of Solomon, the man who had everything Saka never asked for, yet held it with such grace it made Saka ache. The ring did not answer, but it stayed. It had not burned him. That too was a kind of reply. Still the Jinn around him waited. They wanted direction, permission, revenge, but Saka remained silent. He knew that power gained too easily was fragile. He did not seek to rule like Solomon. He sought something deeper, to reshape the silence into a new kind of speech. But silence does not bend easily. And in the 4th night the ring grew cold, not lifeless, cold like a memory withdrawing. He raised his hand to the mirror, searching for meaning in the flicker of the ring's light. And then, for the first time, the reflection changed. Not his face, not his hand, but behind him a figure, veiled in shadow but vast, not Jinn, not man. A form Saka did not recognize, but his fire remembered. It did not speak. It simply watched. And then the mirror shattered, not with sound, but with wind. All flames in the chamber died, even his, and the ring. It pulsed once, then grew still. And for the first time since taking it, Saka felt something he had not known in centuries. Doubt. Not fear. Doubt. Because something else had seen him, and it had not smiled. The silence did not remain still. It moved, like smoke through sealed chambers, like forgotten prayers whispered in a tongue older than language. It reached into Solomon's court, not as a scream, but as absence. And in absence, even the faithful begin to tremble. The elders gathered outside the prophet's doors. They did not knock. They waited. For when the king no longer commands, even the wind holds its breath. Inside, Solomon's face was pale, but not from fear, from mourning. He did not mourn the ring. He mourned what it carried. The covenant between fire and light, between Jinn and man, between the seen and the unseen. Without the ring, he could still pray. But the heavens answered in echoes now, not whispers. He could still speak, but the winds no longer leaned in to listen. And yet, he did not summon his armies. He did not send the birds. He knew the one who had allowed the ring to be taken could return it with a single breath. So he waited. But in the unseen realm, Saka had not waited. He had begun to speak, not commands, decrees. He summoned old Jinn, those who had hidden beneath rivers, those who had nested in crumbled towers swallowed by sand. He did not demand allegiance. He offered memory. And Jinn, who forget nothing, bowed to memory before they ever bowed to power. Saka reminded them of what they had lost, the skies they once danced in, the stories they once told without permission. The names they bore before Solomon's seal turned them into servants. He spoke like a prophet, though he claimed no prophecy. And the ring? It pulsed with each word, not in approval, but in acknowledgement, as if the ring itself were waiting to see what Saka would become. a tyrant cloaked in sorrow, or a fire that sought to heal what it once scorched. But not all Jinn were swayed. Among them was one, a quiet one, named Zafir, whose fire was thin but constant, like the last flame of a candle before dawn. Zafir had served Solomon without protest, not because he feared, because he believed. And now, seeing Saka wear the seal, his flame did not grow. It trembled. One night, when the others slept in coils of shadow, Zafir approached the chamber where Saka sat, the ring on his hand and silence at his side. "My king," he said softly, "I do not question your right to speak, but I question the silence you create when you do." Saka opened his eyes slowly. "You fear what I will command?" "I fear what you will forget," Zafir answered. "That once you refused to bow not out of pride, but because you were waiting for a voice that sounded like mercy." Saka looked at the ring. It was dim again. "You think I've forgotten?" he asked. "I think," Zafir said, "you are becoming the silence you once feared." No fire flared. No punishment followed. Saka merely looked down at his own hand. "I wore the silence for centuries," he murmured. "Now the silence wears me." And for the first time since taking the ring, he removed it. Not in surrender, but in sorrow. It rested on the black stone between them. Still, silent. Zafir did not touch it. He bowed his head and left. And Saka, the first fire, sat in darkness. But this darkness did not comfort him. It did not listen. It did not echo. It swallowed. And far above, in the court of Solomon, the wind stirred. Just once, but enough to make the prophet raise his head. The silence was beginning to break. There are silences that hold peace, and there are silences that hollow the soul. When Solomon stepped into the outer court for the first time in 7 days, the earth itself seemed to hush. The people fell still. Even the animals in the city slowed their movements, as if the dust beneath their paws remembered who walked among them. But the ring was still gone, and the king who once commanded the elements now walked with bare hands and a bowed head. He passed through the market, not as a ruler, but as a question. The gold of his garments no longer glowed. The air did not shift around his steps. The scent of prophecy that once lingered behind him had faded into the fabric of time. Yet his eyes burned with something greater than loss, not defiance, not despair. Faith. He walked to the eastern gate, where the wall of the city met the wilderness. He raised his hands, not to speak, but to remember. And he whispered, not with command, but with longing, "O you who gives rings to kings and wisdom to winds, return to me not the seal, but the silence that listens." And in that moment a breeze, slight, trembling, passed through the gate. Not enough to move the trees, but enough to lift a single grain of dust from the ground. And Solomon smiled, because it was not power he had lost. It was permission. And now, even in exile, he had been heard. Far away, Saka stirred in his sleep. His dream was strange. He stood not as a Jinn, not as fire, but as a child, a boy of dust and breath. He held the ring in his hands, but it no longer fit his finger. It pulsed, then vanished. And a voice, once stern, not soft, spoke behind him. "You cannot carry remembrance until you learn to forget yourself." He awoke gasping. The chamber was dark, but not silent. The ring still lay beside him, untouched. But something had changed. The stone beneath it was cracked, as if the ring's weight had deepened in the night. And Saka, for the first time, felt tired, not weary from years, but heavy with knowing. He stepped outside, into the wide cavern where the Jinn had gathered. Waiting, wondering, he did not speak to them. He raised the ring and returned it to the earth. A hush swept through the chamber like a wave. And then he whispered, "Let the ring choose who will carry it next." No one moved, not out of fear, but reverence, because they knew even the ring had ears. And in the silence that followed, something ancient stirred, From beneath the stone, a whisper rose. Not a voice, a sound, like wind over the surface of a still lake. The ring lifted from the ground, slowly, gently, as if held by unseen hands. And then it vanished. Not in fire, not in light, in stillness. Saka bowed his head. He had not failed, but he had not been chosen. And he understood. The ring did not belong to those who claimed silence. It belonged to those who carried it. Far away, Solomon slept, and in his dream a breeze passed through a garden of stars, and something warm returned to his hand. He opened his eyes. The ring was there, but it no longer shone like before. It pulsed with breath, not his, and he wept, not because he had reclaimed it, but because now he understood. It had never truly been his, and in the shadows beneath the earth, Saka whispered one final prayer. If I was never meant to carry the seal, let me still carry the silence. And the wind, gentle as a promise, wrapped around him like a robe. The fire did not return, but neither did it leave. It rested. And in that rest, a new kind of remembrance began to grow. One not bound by rings, but by mercy. It is said that beneath every throne, something unseen waits. Not jewels, not stone, but a truth too deep for kings to speak. And Solomon's throne, carved from cedar and inlaid with gold, where lions of silver stood guard beside steps etched with the names of prophets, held more than the wisdom of men. It sat above a fire that never burned, a fire sealed beneath the foundation, long before Solomon was born, older than iron, older than war. A fire that knew the first command ever whispered into creation, be. The builders never spoke of it. The Jinn who laid the stones had sealed their tongues with silence. But the wind remembered, and so did the ring. When it returned to Solomon's hand that night, not by force, not by storm, but by stillness, it pulsed once, then grew warm, not hot, warm like the breath of something awakening beneath the floor. Solomon did not rise from his prayer mat. He stayed bowed in the quiet, head to the earth, arms empty of command. He did not thank the ring. He did not weep. He listened. And in that listening, he heard, not words, but something deeper. The shifting of stone, the inhale of dust, the fire below. It did not rage. It did not hunger. It waited. And Solomon, now more servant than king, understood. The fire was not against him. It was beneath him, and it had always been. He rose slowly, each movement like a verse. He walked barefoot to the edge of the throne chamber, where the polished floors reflected not just light, but memory. Each step sent echoes through the silence. And when he reached the base of the throne, he placed his hand on the stone. It was warm. Not from sun or torch, from something breathing underneath. He did not command it. He whispered to it, I do not sit above you as master. I stand above you as witness. And for the first time since the temple's completion, the fire below responded. Not with flame, with sound, a low, rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat buried in the bones of the world. Solomon closed his eyes. It was not dangerous. It was not wild. It was a remembering. The fire had been placed there, not to destroy Wes, but to remind. Of what? Of who lit it? Before the angels, before the Jinn, before men. The one who speaks in sparks and silence. Solomon understood now why the ring had returned, not because he had proven himself strong, but because he had proven himself empty. No throne can bear the weight of heaven unless the one who sits upon it knows how to kneel. And beneath him the fire pulsed again. Elsewhere, in the hidden realm, Saka stood alone by the edge of the night. He had not pursued the ring. He had not spoken to the Jinn. He stood still, not in exile, in devotion. The silence he had feared now wrapped around him like a second skin, not to blind him, to keep him warm. And in the silence, he felt it. The same pulse Solomon now heard. From beneath the earth, from beneath the throne, and in his chest the fire bowed, not out of fear, out of love. In the days that followed, something invisible changed in the temple. The air was still sweet with incense, but it carried a new weight, as if unseen eyes now lingered just beyond the veil of light, watching, remembering. Solomon did not speak often, but when he did, the words felt like they came from deeper wells. Not from the throne, from beneath it. The Jinn returned to their labors, slow, silent, respectful, not in fear of punishment, but in reverence. They had heard what happened. The ring vanished, and yet returned, not with thunder, not with conquest, but with surrender, and the fire beneath the throne had stirred. They remembered the day the throne was first raised, the day the ring shone like a second sun, and Solomon spoke the command that sealed the foundations. Let what is beneath remain still, unless the one who lit it speaks again. Only 3 Jinn had known what that meant. Only one still lived. His name was Azaz. He had not built with his hands. He had carved with his breath. It was Azaz who whispered the verses that held the fire quiet beneath the king, not to extinguish it, but to bind it in remembrance. Now, after all these years, he stood once more in the lower halls of the palace, his face worn like parchment, his fire no longer fierce, but faithful. He placed his ear to the stones beneath the throne, and what he heard was not rage. It was not restlessness. It was grief. The fire was weeping. He rose slowly, placing his hand on the stone. I understand, he whispered. You were never sealed out of punishment. You were sealed because we forgot to listen. And far above, Solomon opened his eyes. He descended into the lower chambers, alone. His steps were soft, like someone entering a place of mourning. He found Azaz waiting, his head bowed, and without a word, the prophet joined him, lowering himself to the stone. They did not speak to each other. They spoke to the fire, not with words, but with silence. And in that silence, the fire responded. It rose, not in flame, but in warmth, like the hand of an old friend, like the breath of something that had once known love and feared it had been forgotten. Solomon placed the ring on the stone, and it did not move. He did not command it. He simply said, "If I forget who gave it, let me never wear it again." And the fire grew still once more, but not buried, alive, as if waiting for a new kind of obedience, one that did not come from thrones or rings or fear, but from remembrance and from far beyond the city, in the distant wilderness where no roads reached. Saka stood beneath a blackened sky. He had felt the stirring. He had heard the fire weep, and for the first time in his long wandering, he knew. The fire beneath Solomon's throne was not a threat. It was a mirror, and what it reflected was not power, but truth. The night that followed was moonless. The sky above Jerusalem held its breath, as if even the stars feared to speak. And beneath the earth, beneath the marble and cedar, the fire that remembered heaven waited, not for permission, but for understanding. Solomon did not return to the throne. He sat beside it, day after day, night after night, sometimes in silence, sometimes in whispered prayer, but never in command. The ring remained on the stone, untouched, unworn, a symbol not of control, but of surrender. The court around him adjusted. The elders ruled with care. The servants moved with reverence. Even the Jinn worked without orders, guided not by threat, but by the echo of who Solomon had become. And in the distant lands the whispers spread, "The king who ruled the wind has laid down his ring." To men this was strange. To angels it was sacred. But among the Jinn it stirred something deeper. Some rejoiced, thinking the time of servitude was over. Others feared that without the ring their own hearts would return to chaos. And Saka, who had once longed for power, now longed only for stillness. He sat upon a mountain peak where clouds passed like forgotten spirits. He closed his eyes and remembered the feel of the ring. Not its power, but its silence. He thought of the fire beneath the throne. He had never seen it, but he knew its breath. He too carried that breath, once wild, now quiet. And he whispered to the sky, "If I'm still your servant, show me the place where even fire kneels." He did not expect an answer, but a raven flew past. Then another. And then a dozen more, silent, black as night, wings wide and slow. He followed. Days passed. No path, no road, only flight, until he reached a valley where the ground was made of glass, as if the sun had kissed it too long and left behind its skin. There, in the center, stood a single stone, smooth, cold, unmoved, and beneath it, he felt it, the same breath, the same fire, the same silence. He knelt, not because he was told, because something in him remembered. He pressed his palm to the stone. No visions came, no voices, but his fire bowed. It curled inward, resting, and from beneath the earth he felt it, a pulse, not demanding, not judging, inviting, and then a sound, not from below, from within, a voice, soft as sleep, whispering from his own chest. "You were not made to carry the seal. You were made to carry the silence." And he wept, not in grief, in knowing all this time, all the wandering, all the longing, all the fire had been for this, to become empty enough to hear again. And far away, in Solomon's chamber, the prophet lifted the ring once more. But this time it did not shine. It breathed. He placed it upon his finger, not to wear it as king, but to carry it as servant. And in that moment, the fire beneath the throne pulsed once and fell silent again, not out of sorrow, out of peace, because it had been seen. And above the city the stars returned, each one a witness, each one a prayer. And the wind carried no words that night, only warmth. There are rings that bind kingdoms, and then there are rings that bind the soul. This was not a ring of gold. It was not forged by men. It was not bartered, stolen, or given as prize. It was gifted in silence by a voice that speaks without sound. And now it no longer belonged to a throne. Solomon, son of David, the prophet king, sat upon the earth, not upon a seat of carved lions and ivory, but upon sand. It was the season of fasting, and the breeze that blew through Jerusalem no longer sang of royalty, but of retreat. The ring was still upon his finger, but it did not shimmer. It did not command. It merely pulsed, like the beat of a heart not fully healed. He touched it gently, not as one claiming ownership, but as one tending to a wound. He remembered the day he had first received it. Not from an angel with wings, but from a silence that entered his dreams. He had awoken with the ring already on his finger. No sound, no explanation. Only a weight, soft but undeniable. And now, all these years later, he began to understand. The ring had not come to give him power. It had come to test what he would do without it. The true throne was never the one he sat on. It was the fire he could not see, the silence he could not command, the obedience he could not prove to others, only to God. He rose from the sand, his robes dusty, his crown unworn, and he walked the city in silence. Not a single soul bowed, not because they were defiant, but because he no longer asked them to. They watched him pass, and something in their hearts bowed on its own, not to his image, but to his surrender. In the shadows of the alleys, a child ran to him, barefoot, eyes wide with wonder. She did not speak. She simply took his hand, and he let her lead him through broken streets and silent doorways to the place where the poor slept, where walls wept with cold and the stars peered in through cracks. He sat among them, listened to their grief, and when he prayed, he did not pray for power to return. He prayed that he might never forget what the ring had taken to teach him. Far away, in the mountains, beyond the reach of names, Saka watched the night. He had not seen Solomon since the day the ring returned. He had not dared, but he could feel something shift. Not in the sky, not in the earth. In himself. There was no more longing, only listening. He sat beside a fire that no longer belonged to him. It did not rage, it did not consume, it simply warmed the ground. The Jinn who had once gathered now stayed at a distance. Not from fear, from reverence. They could sense the change. The one who had once defied the bowing had now bowed in silence. And the fire respected him for it. He no longer gave them commands. He shared them stories. He spoke of the time before light was divided from shadow. He spoke of a throne built not upon stone, but upon patience. He spoke of a ring that refused to shine for those who sought it. And the Jinn listened, for fire remembers stories. And they knew this one was true. Above them, the stars passed slowly, like scribes etching silence into the firmament. And the ring at the faraway pulsed once more. Not in the hand of a king, in the heart of a servant. There is a weight that comes with power, but heavier still is the weight of mercy. Solomon now walked not as a king, but as a man whom power had passed through. Not once, but twice. And each time it had left behind something different. The first time it left wonder. The second time, wisdom. He no longer saw the ring as a seal of command, but as a reminder. A tether between realms. A rope made of silence and surrender, stretched across the unseen. And so he wore it only when he prayed, never when he judged, never when he ruled. Because he understood now to wear the ring too often was to forget the one who gave it. And beyond the courts, the Jinn felt it too. No new commands had been given, no punishments issued, and yet they obeyed, because obedience without fear is a higher submission. And Solomon had given them a new kind of trust, the trust of restraint. Some Jinn left the city, not in rebellion but in retreat, to rediscover what they were before servitude. Others remained curious, and among them was Zafir, the quiet one, the watcher, the one who had once told Saka, "You are becoming the silence you feared." Zafir now sat by the temple gates, not to guard, but to listen. He did not speak unless spoken to. He tended to the animals. He watered the vines. He listened to the wind. And one day, the king himself approached him, barefoot, dust on his robe. No guards, only the ring tucked away, unseen. Zafir bowed, but Solomon lifted his hand. "Do not bow," he said softly. "Today I come not as king, but as someone who needs to ask." Zafir waited. Solomon sat beside him. "I do not know if I should still wear it," the king said. Zafir looked toward the horizon. The sun was beginning to fall behind the hills. "Then perhaps," he whispered, "you should not ask if you should wear it, but who you become when you do." The wind moved gently between them as if nodding. Solomon closed his eyes. He could still feel the heat of the fire beneath the throne, the weight of angels' silence, the breath of something older than both man and Jinn. And for a moment, he took the ring from his finger. He held it in his palm like a seed, something meant to be planted, not displayed. "What if the ring was never mine?" he asked. Zafir smiled faintly. "Then you are already wearing it the way it was meant to be worn. No throne, no crown, no command, just awareness." And far away, across the plains where stars touched the desert without shame, Saka sat in the stillness of his cave, carving verses into the walls. Not spells, not curses, verses of remembrance. He had not seen the ring in many days, but he felt its pulse through the earth. It was not pulling him. It was not testing him. It was resting. And so was he. His fire no longer sought to rise. It curled gently around his bones like a shawl, keeping him warm through the long silence of learning. He did not seek to build a kingdom. He built a memory. And each time he wrote a verse, he whispered the name he once refused to bow for. Adam. Not in mockery, in reconciliation. He had not hated the clay. He had not feared it. He had not understood. But now, having watched the man of clay bear the weight of the seal and still kneel in dust, he understood something deeper. that the worth of a soul was not in what it commanded, but in what it released. In the dream Solomon could not shake, he saw the throne melt, not from fire but from light. It dissolved into mist and memory, and in its place stood a single stone, unmarked, unshaped, unmoved, and upon it the ring. But when he reached for it, his hand turned to dust. He awoke, trembling, the early dawn spilling through the lattice like quiet grace. The ring lay beside him, still warm, not pulsing, just resting. He did not place it back on his finger. Instead, he wrapped it in linen and placed it in a small clay jar, the kind used to store seeds or tears. And he whispered, "If I am still worthy, let me be known by my silence." That day, he sat in the outer court with the people, no guards, no crown. He listened to a boy recite poetry about the rivers of paradise. He watched an old woman stitch a torn sandal. He smiled when a Jinn child ran past him, chasing a butterfly made of ash. No one noticed that the ring was gone, and that was the greatest mercy. Because a throne should never be guarded by symbols, but by the hearts it has healed. Far from the temple, in a barren gorge veined with old fire, Saka stood at the edge of a crumbling cliff. Below him was silence, not the dead kind, but the waiting kind, the kind that feels like breath, drawn just before speech. He opened his palms and whispered not a command, but a question. Did I carry it well? There was no reply, only a breeze, gentle, cool, that circled his hands and lingered like a farewell. He understood. The ring had not come to choose, it had come to reveal. And in that revelation, both he and Solomon had changed. No longer king, no longer exile, only witnesses. Two servants, one of fire, one of clay, who had stood before a remembrance too sacred to possess. Later that night, a messenger arrived in Solomon's court. A bird, not large, a swallow wings dusty with journey. It dropped a single feather at the prophet's feet, then vanished into the rafters. The feather glowed faintly, not with fire, but with peace. And Solomon bowed his head. He did not ask where it came from. He knew Saka had sent no message. Only a symbol, and that was enough. The prophet returned to his chamber, unsealed the jar, and placed the feather beside the ring. He did not put it back on his finger. He simply looked at both and whispered, "Let what is holy rest." That night, the fire beneath the throne did not stir, nor did the winds howl, nor did the stars fall. Everything rested. And in the stillness the ring pulsed once more, not for Solomon, not for Saka, for remembrance. And remembrance needs no throne. Before the Jinn knew language, they knew the wind. It taught them how to listen before they ever learned to speak. The wind carried stories long before they were written, not in letters, but in longing. And the truest winds, the oldest ones, carried no name. One such wind stirred beyond the edges of Solomon's kingdom. It moved without direction. It whispered without words. It passed through mountains and cities like a ghost of remembrance, felt but never seen. And it was coming, not for war, not for judgment, for witness. In the early hours before dawn, when even dreams sleep, Solomon stood at the edge of his garden. The pomegranate trees were still, the fig leaves folded like hands in prayer, and the stars, dim but watchful, seemed to lean closer. He heard it before he felt it, the wind, not cool, not warm, just ancient. It moved past his robe without lifting it. It brushed his beard without stirring a single hair, and yet his entire soul bowed. This was not the wind he once commanded. That wind had names: Eastern, Southern, sent for message or for miracle. This wind carried none. It had never obeyed a prophet, not because it was rebellious, but because it belonged to one alone. And now it was here. Solomon dropped to his knees, not out of fear, but out of knowing. The ring still rested in the jar beside his bed, unworn. And yet, as the nameless wind passed him, he felt it pulse, not in demand, in blessing, as if to say, "You remembered." He did not speak. He only listened. The wind circled him once, then moved toward the temple, flowing through the cedar gates, across the stone courts, beneath the golden lions, and into the inner sanctum. And there, where the throne had once ruled, the wind did not sit. It rested, as if waiting for something to rise from the dust. A prayer never spoken, a silence never broken. And far away, in the desert beyond the mountains, Saka opened his eyes. His fire flickered, though no air had touched it. He felt it. The presence of something older than flame, older even than the silence he carried, the nameless wind. It had passed near him once, long ago, before the command to bow, before Adam had opened his eyes. Then it had terrified him. Now he welcomed it. He stood, his steps slow, as if not to startle the very air. The wind approached, and it did not challenge him. It embraced him. It moved through his fire like light through water, not changing him, but showing him his shape. And he saw himself as he once was, not proud, not fallen, searching. And the wind whispered, not in words, but in warmth. You are not forgotten. He fell to the earth. His knees struck stone. His palms met dust. And his fire wept. Not because it was broken, because it was seen. He remained there, unmoving as the wind passed. And though it left no trail, no echo, it left behind something deeper. Peace. Not the peace of stillness, the peace of purpose. He looked to the horizon, and though he saw no path, he knew where to go. Not to Solomon, not to the throne, to the place where the ring had first touched the earth, where the seal had first been laid, where remembrance had been born. The wind had called him, and he would answer. The valley lay in silence, carved by forgotten rivers and watched over by mountains too proud to fall. It had no name, no path, no map could trace it. And yet Saka walked there now. The wind had left him, but its memory pressed gently against his back, guiding him forward. With every step, the ground seemed to sigh, as if recognizing the fire that once resisted, but now surrendered. He passed stones carved by no hands, arches of earth where no man had dwelled, and silence so deep it felt sacred. This was no ordinary place. This was where the seal had first touched the world. Not the seal of the ring, the seal of remembrance. A place where the Jinn were once reminded, not commanded, that fire, too, could kneel. He knelt again, slowly, at the center of a circle of blackened earth. No flame burned here, but the heat was eternal. He placed his hands on the ground, and again he asked nothing. He only listened, and the earth responded, not with voice, but with rhythm. A low hum, a breath from below, the same pulse he had felt the moment the ring passed through his hand. He closed his eyes and whispered, I do not seek the ring. I seek the one who gave it. I do not ask to be chosen. I ask to remember. And in the dust before him, a swirl of ash began to rise. Not in chaos, in shape. It did not become a figure. It became a moment. He saw Solomon as a child, playing near a stream, barefoot and laughing. No crown, no command, only joy. Then the image shifted. Solomon as a man, breaking bread with the poor, touching the sick with a hand that healed not by magic, but by mercy. And finally, Solomon alone, in a darkened chamber, the ring in his palm, whispering, Let me be the servant of silence. The ash settled, and Saka wept, not for the ring, not for the fire, but for the memory of what it meant to be worthy without needing to win. He pressed his forehead to the earth. No power flowed, no light flashed, but the silence wrapped around him like a shroud woven from the first wind. And far away, in Jerusalem, Solomon stirred from sleep. His dream had shown him nothing. No visions, no signs, only warmth. Like the kind you feel when someone finally forgives you now without saying a word. He walked through the temple at dawn, his sandals worn, his eyes hollowed not from sadness, but from having carried too much light. The Jinn bowed, but he did not look at them. He stopped before the throne, now draped in cloth no longer sat upon. He placed his hand gently on its edge, and said, "The fire beneath you no longer waits to be known. It has already been seen." And somewhere, in the valley of ash and silence, the wind passed once more. It did not stop. It did not speak. But it left behind one single feather, black as night and warm to the touch. Saka picked it up. He held it against his chest and said, "I will not carry the seal, but I will carry the silence." And from that day forward, neither king nor Jinn spoke of thrones again, only of what it means to kneel without command. The moon that night hung low over Jerusalem, not in judgment, but in tenderness. Its light did not pierce the earth, it caressed it. And in the shadow of that soft moon, Solomon stood once more where the garden met the edge of the temple wall. No one followed. No guards, no scribes, no creatures of sky or flame. Just him and the wind, but not the wind of direction, not the wind that moves things. The wind that remembers. It circled him again, not to test, but to reflect. It did not ask him questions. It mirrored him. The quiet inside his chest, the warmth in his bones, the echo of surrender that had begun when the ring had vanished and had not yet ended. He looked down at his open palm, empty, and still he smiled, because he understood his true strength had never been in what he held, but in what he was willing to release. And far across the valley, Saka felt it too. He stood now at the edge of the world, or what felt like it. Before him stretched dunes that had never been named, and behind him lay silence that could not be returned to. He no longer carried fire as weapon. It was warmth, a companion. His Jinn brethren had stopped asking him for guidance. They saw something in him that words could not follow, not rule, not mastery, stillness. Saka had become a flame that did not burn, and in the realm of Jinn, that was the rarest kind. He whispered to the sands, "Tell the wind I remember." And a breeze rose from the east, carrying no scent, no salt, no sound, only knowing. It passed over the hills, through forgotten ruins, and into the city once ruled by gold and wisdom. It found Solomon in the garden, and it curled around his wrist like a ribbon. He did not move, but his breath caught, for in that moment he felt something press into his palm. He opened his eyes. There was no ring, but there was weight, not heavy and sacred. He closed his hand again, not to hold, to honor, and he whispered back, "Then let remembrance be enough." The wind, satisfied, vanished, and across the city, across the mountains, across the silence between fire and clay, two servants of the unseen, one who had knelt by command and one who had knelt by choice, carried the same truth in different ways, that the holiest thrones are not built with stone. They are made of silence, of surrender, of fire that no longer seeks to rise, but to rest. And in that rest, a new kind of light is born, not one to dazzle, one to guide, like a wind without a name that moves through prophets and Jinn alike, asking nothing except to be remembered. It came in the season when the sky no longer wept and the soil began to crack, the dry time when prayers clung to the roofs of houses, waiting for permission to rise. And one morning, without warning, a shadow appeared. No footsteps, no sound, no scent of fire or storm, just a presence, still soft and vast. It stood at the edge of Jerusalem, beyond the outer vineyards, cloaked not in darkness, but in memory. The shepherds did not see it. The animals did not flee. Even the trees seemed unsure whether to tremble or bow, because it was not a shadow made of light's absence. It was the shadow of something once holy, returning. Solomon felt it before the sun touched the city walls. His breath caught mid-prayer. His fingers, poised above the scrolls of judgment, froze, not from fear, from knowing. It was Saka, but not the Saka who had tested the ring, not the one who had stirred fire beneath the throne. This was the one who had sat with silence, who had learned to listen with the very bones of his being. He came not to challenge, not to claim, but to remember something. Only the prophet could confirm that he was no longer who he had been. The guards did not stop him. The Jinn did not rise. The wind did not stir. Saka walked through the gates like someone who had been summoned by the absence of sound. And at the temple, Solomon was already waiting. He stood barefoot beneath the olive tree at the east wall, its roots older than any book, its branches heavy with fruit and meaning. They faced each other in silence, clay and fire, not enemies, reflections. Saka lowered his head first, not in submission, in offering, and Solomon, after a long stillness, stepped forward and placed both hands over the Jinn's shoulders. "Welcome," he said, not loudly, not formally, just a word that fit like a robe. Saka looked up. His eyes did not burn. They glowed, like embers that had finally found their resting place. "I did not come for the ring," he whispered. "I know," said the prophet. "I didn't come for forgiveness. There is none to give. I came to return something." Solomon's brow furrowed. Saka reached into the folds of his simple garment, no armor, no veil, and drew out a feather. Black. Still warm. "The wind gave it to me," he said, "but it is not mine." Solomon took it gently. He looked down at the feather and felt the pulse of something eternal. The same breath that had passed through the ring, through the fire, through the throne, now resting in a single strand of remembrance. He closed his eyes and pressed the feather to his lips. "You did not return," he said softly, "to be seen." "No," Saka replied. "I returned to see." The wind, hearing this, passed between them once more, not to confirm, to bless. And far below the earth, in the place where the fire once wept, a single flicker of light blinked like an eye closing in peace. Because what had been broken was not restored. It was transformed. The olive tree watched. Its roots had tasted the blood of prophets and the prayers of wanderers. It had seen crowns placed and torn away. It had heard the laughter of children and the last breaths of kings. But this meeting of fire and clay, of shadow and light, this it remembered as sacred. Solomon led Saka through the courtyard, past the pillars that bore no names, past the halls where the Jinn had once carved silence into stone. No one followed. No one dared. Not out of fear, out of reverence. Somehow they knew this was not a procession. It was a return. The prophet did not speak. He let the silence guide their steps, and Saka followed, each footfall lighter than the last, as if the fire within him no longer clung to weight. They entered the chamber of the scrolls, a place where light fell in thin golden strands through high windows, where even dust dared not settle without permission. Solomon gestured toward the center, a stone basin filled not with water, but with ashes, the remnants of prayers that had been too holy to keep, too fragile to speak aloud. "Place it there," he said. Saka stepped forward and laid the feather in the ashes. It did not sink. It hovered. And then slowly it began to burn, but not in flame, in remembrance. A gentle blue light rose from it, not rising up, but folding inward, as if returning to a place beyond time. When it vanished, nothing remained. No feather, no ash, only stillness. And that was enough. Saka turned to leave, but Solomon raised a hand. "Walk with me," he said. And so they did, out through the courtyard, beyond the temple walls, into the hills that had watched kingdoms rise and fall like breaths. There, on the highest ridge, where the wind could not be told where to go, they sat. The sun was low now. Its last light stretched across the valley like a verse. And Solomon spoke. "You were never the enemy." Saka didn't reply. "You were the reminder," Solomon continued, "that even those who do not bow can still remember." Saka looked out across the land. He could see the faint outline of the sea in the distance. It shimmered like it held all the secrets he had ever wanted.
"I thought I had been forgotten," he said.
Solomon smiled. "Only the arrogant believe remembrance is earned. The rest of us know it is given." Silence fell again, but it was not empty. It was full, like a cup no longer leaking. The prophet stood. "I will not see you again in this life," he said. Saka nodded. "Then let this moment be enough." They bowed to one another.
Not in formality.
In farewell. And the wind moved between them like a prayer with no language. One returned to the temple,
The other.
to the world. But both carried the same flame now, not to burn, to warm. The city did not mark his leaving.
No bells, no proclamations.
No closing of gates. Saka walked at dawn. When the light is so soft it feels like mercy, and the roads are still dreaming. His steps were slow but not hesitant. Each movement was a choice, as if he were rewriting the story of his feet. Behind him, Jerusalem began to wake, but he did not look back. Some say a boy saw him pass the outer vineyard. Others speak of a shepherd whose dogs grew quiet when he drew near.
None spoke to him.
They simply watched, because something about his presence told them this was not a departure. This was a return to wandering, and some wanderings are sacred. He walked until the hills turned to plains, until the stone gave way to sand, until the sky stretched wider than his memories. There, at the edge of everything, he paused. The wind met him again, but this time it did not swirl or rise. It stood still beside him, like an old companion who no longer needed to speak. He knelt in the dust, not to pray, to listen.
And what he heard was nothing. No command, no calling, no name.
Only the vastness of silence, and the echo of a fire that no longer needed to burn to be real. He placed his hand to the ground, and in that touch he remembered the first moment he saw the clay form rise, the voice that spoke without force, the silence he had chosen instead of kneeling. And now the silence chose him. He whispered a single word, one no tongue remembers now, one made of breath and awe. And the earth beneath him grew warm.
Not hot, not dangerous.
Just alive, he smiled. He did not rise. He did not vanish. He remained. A shadow no longer trying to be flame. And somewhere, far beyond the borders of maps, a bird flew over the sea. It carried nothing. No ring, no scroll.
No feather, only memory.
And in Jerusalem Solomon stood on the temple steps, his hands empty, his heart full. The ring rested once more in the jar beside his sleeping mat. He had not worn it in days. He would not wear it again.
Because now he understood.
The true seal was never metal.
It was mercy.
It was surrender. It was the fire that learns how to bow, not by force, but by love. And in the heavens, the angels who had once watched Jinn and man diverge now watched them kneel in the same direction, not to a throne, not to power, to peace.
And the wind
Carried no more messages, because what needed to be said.
had been lived.
He was not a prophet,
Not a king.
not made of fire nor shaped from the clay of revelation. He was a servant. No name is remembered for him, no lineage, no tribe. Only this: he once swept the steps of the temple where Solomon prayed,
And he never touched the ring.
not because he was unworthy, but because he never asked. He would rise before the stars faded, when Jerusalem still lay wrapped in the breath of night. With a cloth of worn wool and a bucket of water drawn from the southern well, he would cleanse the stones that bore the weight of wisdom. Each slab held a memory, a trial judged, a prayer whispered, a miracle quietly refused. And he, bent in silence, wiped away the dust, as if cleaning the breath of history itself. He never spoke to the Jinn, but they noticed him. He never addressed Solomon, but Solomon watched him. For while others sought answers from the throne, this servant asked nothing, gave everything. He listened to the temple, not the words spoken within it, but the echoes it carried. Some said he was mute. Others believed he had chosen never to speak. But if one listened closely, they would hear him humming. Soft tunes that had no beginning, no end. like lullabies remembered by the earth. One morning, as the dew still clung to the branches, Solomon walked barefoot through the courtyard, drawn by the sound of that quiet humming. He found the servant kneeling beneath the arch of lions, scrubbing a stain that refused to lift. The king watched for a while, then knelt beside him. Neither spoke. Solomon dipped his own cloth into the water and pressed it to the stone. Together they worked in silence. 2 men, one with a ring.
One with nothing.
And in that stillness, Solomon felt a knowing rise within him, a truth he had never spoken aloud, that this man, this unnamed servant, had carried the weight of the temple longer than the throne had. After a time the servant stood. He bowed slightly, but not in reverence, but in rhythm, and walked away. Solomon sat alone before the stain, watching the sun rise slowly across the stone. It was still there, and yet it no longer mattered, because some stains remain, not as shame, but as proof that something holy had passed through. He touched the ring on his finger, and for the first time in days he did not feel its weight. He felt the servant's hands, calloused, gentle, steady, and he whispered, "There are those who never seek the ring, and yet carry its remembrance more purely than kings." And the wind, curling through the arches, carried no message that day.
Only song, the quiet hum of a man whose name history forgot.
But heaven never did. No scrolls recorded his deeds. No ink traced the outline of his life. But the walls of the temple, the steps worn smooth by his hands, they remembered him. Every time a prophet walked barefoot through the courtyard, it was this servant's work that met their feet. Every time the winds passed quietly through the gates without resistance, it was his silence they honored. He never entered the sanctuary, not once. He stopped at the threshold every morning, placed his hand gently on the frame, and bowed without words. And in that bow he offered something even the prophets could not: presence without ambition. One evening, as the sun drew long shadows across the altar stones, Solomon sat with the ring in his palm, not wearing it, but watching it. He turned it slowly, its curves worn smooth, its seal no longer glowing, but pulsing, faint and rhythmic, like breath. And he asked aloud, "What makes a man worthy?" The court was empty.
Only the sound of wind outside,
The flicker of oil lamps, and the faint sweep of cloth against stone. The servant, cleaning again. Solomon rose and followed. He found the man crouched beside the pillar where the birds once nested, gathering fallen feathers into a small bowl. Feathers no one would notice, no one would miss. "Why do you collect them?" Solomon asked, voice hushed. The servant paused, turned, his eyes clear but unreadable. And then with slow care he pointed upward, to the highest beam of the temple, where no one could see. There, hidden in the rafters, a nest had been built, not by command, not by design, by trust. He climbed each morning before the court awoke, returning the feathers to the place they belonged. He never disturbed the nest. He only made it whole again. Solomon's heart ached. He had raised towers with the help of Jinn. He had split stones with command. He had drawn maps from the stars. But this man carried the weight of restoration, not with force, with care.
"You have never worn the ring," Solomon whispered.
The servant shook his head. "You have never touched the throne." Another quiet shake. "And yet the temple breathes because of you." The servant smiled, soft and fleeting, the way light falls through clouds and disappears before one can name it. Solomon removed the ring from his hand. He stepped forward, holding it out.
"Take it," he said.
The servant did not move,
Not from pride,
but from clarity. He placed the bowl of feathers on the stone floor, closed Solomon's fingers back over the ring, and bowed once more, then returned to his work. And the prophet, the king, the bearer of the seal,
wept, not because the ring had been refused,
because he understood. Some men are born not to carry the seal. They are born to make the world quiet enough for others to hear it.
Years passed.
Kings came and went. Empires rose and vanished like breath on cold glass. The throne of Solomon stood, sometimes adorned, sometimes abandoned, but the stones remained, and beneath them the memory of the servant lived on. No record bore his name, but the walls never forgot the rhythm of his cloth. The wind never forgot his silent song.
And the ring
Pulsed differently whenever his path was remembered. It is said that long after Solomon's voice grew still, and the Jinn were scattered back into the folds of the unseen, a small boy once wandered into the ruins of the temple. He carried no scroll, no crown.
only a bowl filled with feathers.
He did not know why he brought them, only that something in his dreams had told him, "Return what the wind could not carry alone." The courtyard was silent. The stones cracked wild with weeds. But as he stepped into the inner chamber, the place once guarded by fire and command, a breeze moved through the broken rafters.
Not strong, not sudden, gentle, like a sigh of someone remembering they were still loved.
The boy climbed the shattered steps. He reached the beam where the nest had long since vanished.
And he placed the feathers there, not for glory,
Not for reward.
for return.
As he climbed down, he paused beside the basin where ashes once burned with song. He placed one feather there too, and before it could fall, it vanished.
Not with fire, not with smoke.
With peace, he turned to leave, but the wind stopped him, just for a moment. It passed across his brow like a hand made of memory, and though he would never know its name, he would remember its warmth. And outside the broken walls, an old man, bent, hooded, hands like roots, smiled without turning. His task had been carried, his silence remembered, his throne never built, but never needed.
'Cause some servants never wear rings.
But the world turned softer because they walked it, and the sky that night bore no stars, only stillness. And in that stillness the heavens whispered, "There is no greater crown than to carry nothing but light." It began not with smoke, but with silence. Not the silence of emptiness, but the silence that comes before revelation. The kind of silence that makes even fire hold its breath. Far from the ruins of Solomon's court, beyond the shadowed thresholds where Jinn once knelt, there stood a hidden place, not written in scrolls, not whispered in caravans, not remembered by kings.
Only the wind knew the way.
And the wind, as always, carried its secrets like prayers. Gently, but never carelessly, they called it the Valley of the Unseen Flame, not because the fire could not be seen, but because it chose who saw it. The valley was jagged, torn by time and the trembling of mountains.
Its stones were blackened, scorched, as if touched by something that remembered the first breath of the earth.
Yet in the center, where fire once danced like a prophet's robe, there flowed water, still, silent, holy.
And in that water,
Was flame. It did not consume.
it did not roar.
It whispered. It told stories to the rocks. It murmured verses to the sky. And if you listened closely, closer than breath, closer than blood, you would hear it say things not even angels remembered.
This was no ordinary fire.
It was said that in the time before time, when the Jinn were first moulded from smokeless flame, a single spark refused to rise. Not out of rebellion, but reverence. It fell downward, deep into the roots of the earth, seeking something no other flame desired. Stillness. And from that stillness this valley was born. For centuries no foot touched its soil.
No eye pierced its veil. Only the pure, or the broken beyond pride, could find it.
And on one forgotten night, as stars hid their faces and the moon wept behind a veil of sand, someone came.
Not a prophet.
Not a king, a girl. She walked alone, her sandals torn, her breath shallow, but her eyes, they held questions too old for speech. She did not come to conquer. She did not come to ask. She came because something in her soul had broken open, like clay cracked under holy heat, and the shards had begun to hum. The fire heard her before she spoke, and when she reached the edge of the water, she did not cry. She simply knelt. The flame rose slightly, not high, just enough to meet her gaze.
And then it spoke. Not in words.
Not in sound, but in water. The ripples moved like verses, surahs written in waves, divine names dancing in liquid breath. And the girl understood. She remembered the voice of her mother, gone now, swallowed by silence. She remembered the taste of dates offered in kindness by a stranger. She remembered the way her father once held her hand beneath a fig tree and told her, "Some fires burn to destroy, but some burn to reveal." And in that moment, the valley accepted her. She did not take the fire. She became part of it. Her name, too, was never recorded, but it is said that wherever she walked afterward, stones softened.
Jinn stepped aside,
And shadows bowed without knowing why. Because when a soul listens deeply enough to fire that speaks like water, it carries something even the fiercest wind cannot extinguish. And though the valley faded from maps, and time folded its memory beneath layers of sand, sometimes, when the night is very still, and you place your hands into a quiet stream, you may feel it, warmth,
not of heat,
but of holiness, as if something ancient just remembered you, as if the fire that fell in love with silence was still whispering, waiting, watching, and when it speaks again, may you be still enough to hear it. There were Jinn who had heard of the valley, but none dared enter it,
not because they feared the fire,
but because they feared what it revealed. The Jinn king, Al-Bathur, long before his war against Solomon, had once sent a scout, a silent one, shrouded in desert wind, with wings of ember and eyes like pale smoke. He returned without voice,
not because he lost it,
but because he had no more need for speech. His silence said enough. From that day on, Al-Bathur forbade any of his kind from approaching the valley again. It was not written in his decrees, but whispered between the winds that carried his name. Some flames do not belong to us, but time, as always, forgot what pride tried to bury. And when the king fell, when the ring was taken, when Solomon's command scattered the high houses of flame into the corners of the world, the valley stirred. For decades it slept again, until the girl, the one without name, brought her silence to its edge. What she learned there was not power.
It was memory.
Not memory of the self, but memory of the first breath. The moment when the command was given, be, and the light unfolded into the darkness. And the Jinn, made from flame, opened their eyes for the first time. She saw it, in the shimmer of the fire's dance, in the hush of the water's stillness. She saw the covenant they had forgotten, that they were not made to rule, nor to be ruled, but to witness, to guard the spaces where silence dwells, keep the thresholds between the unseen and the seen. And yet, how far they had fallen from that sacred task. The girl wept, but not out of despair. Her tears were not salt and sorrow, they were light. Each drop, as it fell, lit the surface of the water until the flame reflected itself in 1,000 shimmering fragments. She was not alone. From the shadows another came.
A Jinn, not highborn, not noble, but old.
So old, his flames no longer burned bright, but flickered like oil nearing the end of its wick. He had once served under Al-Bathur. He had carried out commands with fire-soaked hands. He had burned scrolls, shattered wells, and silenced prophets too young to understand their message. He came not to seek redemption. He knew he did not deserve it. He came because the whisper of the fire had reached even him, and it had said, "Come, the silence remembers you." He stood at the edge of the water, unsure if he would be consumed. But the girl turned. Her eyes met his, and she did not speak judgment. She only said, "Sit." And the old Jinn, for the first time in centuries, folded his wings and knelt. The flame did not rise. The water did not stir.
It was enough.
The act of kneeling was the beginning of remembering. The valley grew quiet once more. But the quiet was different now. Full, listening, alive.
More came, a wandering priest who had lost his voice to grief, a widow who no longer dreamed,
A boy who had never spoken but knew the name of every bird by heart, each drawn not by desire, but by each finding in the valley not miracles but mirrors. They did not take the flame, but something passed into them.
a slowness, a reverence, a knowing.
They carried it outward, into marketplaces, into mountain trails, into caves forgotten by time. They whispered things in their sleep. They spoke gently to those who burned too fast. And wherever they passed, the earth seemed to sigh in relief.
And the Jinn?
The old one stayed. He watched the flame daily, not as a servant, but as a witness. And when the time came, he vanished.
Not in smoke, in silence.
It is said his essence was taken into the fire, and now on rare nights, when the moon is low and the wind carries stories like seeds, you can hear a voice like rustling leaves say, "We were made for awe, not dominion, to kneel before mystery, not command it." And so the valley remains, hidden, humming, holy, waiting not for those who seek it, but for those it remembers. And when it calls again, will the world still know how to listen? The girl who knelt by the water was never seen again, not in the way the world keeps records. No scroll bore her name, no temple carved her likeness into stone, no scribe sang her lineage into the line of prophets. And yet she was remembered,
Not by books.
but by balance. Wherever the silence deepened, she was there. Wherever fire refused to consume and water whispered instead of rushing, she was near. They said that in the years after Solomon's fall, when the world grew loud with the cries of kings and the ambitions of Jinn queens rising from desert ruins, there were still places that remained untouched. Gardens where no blade of grass bent without permission. Rivers that ran uphill just to cradle a fallen bird. Caves where no echo dared distort a name. These were the echoes of her presence. For the flame had taught her what even Solomon's ring could not contain. That power is not in the voice that commands, but in the ear that listens. The fire, like water, speaks to those who ask without words. It teaches not by answer, but by invitation. And so the girl became an invitation herself. To remember what it means to burn without pride, to shine without harm, to be seen without needing to conquer. The old Jinn's legacy was different. Those who met him, in markets, under fig trees, beside broken wells, did not recognize him for what he had once been. They saw only a wanderer, silent, slow to speak, quick to bow. He mended things, cracked pots, splintered walking staffs. He poured water over feet blistered from long roads.
And sometimes,
just before parting, he would press 2 fingers gently to the chest of a child or a weeping man and whisper, "The fire is still listening."
are you?
They did not understand. But later, days, weeks, even years, they would find themselves pausing in the middle of a prayer or halting before speaking in anger, as if something unseen had laid a hand upon their shoulder.
And they would weep,
Not from sorrow, but from recognition.
as if some old vow, long forgotten, was being remembered again.
Meanwhile, deep in the folds of the earth, the valley waited. Seasons passed. Empires rose and cracked like clay under divine heat. The name of Solomon became a crown for stories, a shadow to which lesser kings compared themselves. But the valley was not impressed. It did not rise to meet the new rulers. It did not whisper to the arrogant. It waited for the humble, for the broken, for those who carried silence the way others carried swords.
And sometimes,
When the veil between worlds grew thin, a voice could be heard, not in the ears, but in the soul. When the fire speaks like water, let your pride dissolve like salt in a river. Let your name fall like ash.
only then can you carry the breath of the unseen. They say the girl became a myth.
Some claimed she was not a girl, but a Jinn reborn. Others swore she was a prayer-given form. A few believed she had never existed at all. But the fire remembered, the water remembered, and in the sacred scrolls, not written by ink, but by wind and shadow and holy breath, she is etched not in letters, but in silence.
A silence that does not erase,
but protects. A silence that does not hide, but sanctifies. And so if ever you find yourself near a pool that burns gently in the dark, or a cave where fire does not crackle but hums like an ancient song, stop.
Place your hand on the stone.
Close your eyes.
And listen. If your heart is quiet enough, you may feel her passing by.
Not as flame,
Not as water,
but as both. And in that sacred merging, you will understand why even the Jinn bowed to the silence. And why Solomon, in all his wisdom, never dared claim the valley for himself. There was once a city where the chains did not silence the voice of the people, but taught it how to sing. Its name is forgotten by the tongues of men, buried beneath dunes and dust. But the Jinn still whisper of it in the dry winds that pass between mountains of salt. They say it was built by the command of a king, but shaped by those who were never meant to be kings. Those who were bound, twisted, and struck silent by rings of command and eyes of judgment. And yet they sang, not with mouths, not with tongues, but with a rhythm that pulsed through the stone and through the fire that had learned to carry sorrow. This was a city that remembered every footfall as a cry. Every brick in its walls held the breath of the enslaved, and every alleyway, no matter how narrow, opened to the heavens as though hoping the sky might hear what earth had buried. Do you understand what it means for a city to breathe in chains? Its soul becomes shaped by echoes. Its sky becomes heavy with silence. But in that silence, miracles begin to grow. Hidden beneath the weight of forgotten names, there are roots that twist with defiance. And though they are never seen, they remember. They hold the water of pain in the vessels of memory,
and they do not die.
In the center of this city stood a tower, blackened, twisted like scorched iron, tall enough to pierce the breath of dawn. They called it the spine of the mountain, for it rose where no stone should rise, and bent toward no command but its own curse. It was here that the Jinn king, once cast out by Solomon, built his throne of defiance. He did not rule with cruelty. No, his cruelty had matured into something softer, something far more terrifying. He ruled with grief, with memory, with the lullabies of those who still wept in their labor. He had once tasted the holiness of a ring, once felt its warmth scorch his pride, and in its absence he became not a king of fire, but a king of embers. He collected the broken. He called to the Jinn who had been dismissed from courts, discarded by masters, orphaned from the commands that once gave them purpose. He called the windwalkers, the stonebinders, the dream weavers who had once whispered to the minds of men, but had since been forgotten like myths, fading beneath the sunlight. They came not for glory, but for grief, and he gave them a city, a place to build again, but not in freedom. No, not yet. Because grief, when it is not healed, becomes its own prison. And the city was shaped by that sorrow. Its walls leaned inward like hunched shoulders. Its fire burned low, not in rage, but in mourning. The bells that marked the passing of time rang not in triumph, but in remembrance. For those who had disappeared, who had broken under the burden of unseen commands, who had been swallowed by silence.
And yet the city breathed.
The children of the Jinn, born beneath twilight stars, grew up learning how to shape silence into strength. They were never taught the language of masters, only the rhythm of memory, and so they carved their names into walls with smoke. They wrote their prayers on the undersides of stones with fire that glowed for only a moment, then faded. It was not rebellion, it was remembrance. And above them all, in the tower that never bowed to sunrise, the Jinn King sat upon a throne of shadowed crystal, listening. He did not speak. He listened. For in the singing chains there were prophecies. The mournful cadence of those bound to sorrow carried more truth than the loudest scrolls of the world. And the king, who had once been enslaved by Solomon's ring, now listened to the song of his people, not to command, not to punish, but to understand what he had become. He did not forgive the heavens, but he remembered them, and that is a wound no fire can heal. Then came a night unlike any other, when the sky did not burn, but wept. The winds howled like forgotten wolves, and the sands rose like ghosts remembering their names. The moon refused to look down upon the city, and the tower trembled, as if the memory of something old had returned. The children felt it first,
A silence too deep, too wide, as if the song had stopped, not because it was finished, but because something had begun listening.
from beneath the city, from beneath the roots that held the memory of grief, something ancient stirred,
Not Jinn, not man.
but a voice, deep, formless, and cruel in its hunger. It had once been trapped by Solomon himself, bound beneath stone and sealed with the first command ever spoken into the world. And now the command was cracking. The song of the city, its grief, its resonance, its holy rhythm of sorrow, had loosened the stone. Not because it wished to set the voice free, but because even grief can be heard by things that were never meant to listen. And as the voice awakened, the tower of the Jinn King shuddered. For the first time, he felt something he had not known since the ring was torn from his hand. Fear. The fire that had once obeyed him now flickered with uncertainty. The chains that once sang now trembled with dissonance. The city held its breath, not in reverence but in waiting, because what had been buried beneath their mourning was not mourning at all. It was wrath, and wrath remembers everything. It did not rise like thunder. It did not roar. It whispered, the kind of whisper that makes the bones remember the first time they cracked under command. From beneath the earth, between the old chambers where ancient Jinn once buried their pride, like coins in broken jars, the voice uncoiled. It had no mouth,
It had no name.
but it had been waiting,
Long before Solomon wore the ring.
long before the Valley of Fire was sealed. Before even the division between Jinn and man was written in the air by angels, this voice had been, and it hated being forgotten. The Jinn King felt it before any other, a cold fire beneath the soles of his feet,
A heatless hunger in the center of his spine.
a tremor in the chains that once sang like lullabies. He rose from the crystal throne, that ancient seat carved not from glory, but from 1,000 shards of memory. He walked to the edge of the tower's crown where the sky once bent to his command. But this time the sky did not answer. The stars were turning. One by one, they twisted their faces away, as if shielding themselves from what would rise. The children in the city had stopped playing.
Even the sand refused to move.
Every whisper, every footfall, every ember held its breath.
And then it began.
The earth cracked, not with violence, but like skin that had been dry too long. From the heart of the city, beneath the tower of chains, a light began to spill. But it was not fire. It was older, a shimmer not of warmth, but of memory so deep it could unmake even truth. This was the voice made visible, the breath of something that had once tried to name God and was cast into silence for its arrogance. Now silence had turned into shape. The king descended the stairs barefoot, each step a sacrifice. He shed his robe of ash. He unbound the veil of flame that once crowned his head.
And he stepped into the deep. He did not bring fire with him.
He brought the song that had been sung in chains, the song that had been wept into stone. the song that rose from the backs of builders and mothers and dreamers who never lived long enough to see the sky. He sang it, softly, and the voice in the dark listened.
It hated him.
Because it remembered him. It had watched the day he bowed to Solomon. It had howled when he tasted mercy. It had twisted in envy when he chose to serve silence instead of vengeance.
You, the voice breathed, though it had no breath.
You chose to kneel when you could have ruled. The king said nothing. You carried the weight of command, but never wielded it. Still he was silent. You built a city from sorrow and called it sanctuary. You wept with the broken and called it rule. The king closed his eyes, then spoke only once. And yet I am not you. The light flared. 1,000 memories exploded in the chamber. Images, faces, shadows, screams. The chains in the city walls trembled. The children felt a scream pass through their hearts that had no sound. But the king stood still, because he remembered something the voice could not. Chains may bind a body, but grief refines a soul. And it was that grief, sanctified, unclaimed by rage, that held the voice at bay. Because wrath, when met with silence, falters. Because hunger, when offered a mirror, begins to fear its own shape. The king did not strike. He did not chant or command. He knelt, he sang. The old song, the song his people had built beneath burdens they never chose. The song that turned pain into memory and memory into light.
And in that song the city found its shield.
The voice screamed.
Not in rage, but in remembrance.
It remembered what it had been before it turned. It remembered the holiness of names unspoken. It remembered the silence before the first command shattered the veil. And for a moment, just a breath in eternity, it wept. And then it faded, not defeated, but changed. The earth closed. The cracks sealed like skin stitched by unseen hands. The light dimmed. The chains began to hum again, low, sacred, at peace. The king rose slowly, his face wet with tears no fire could dry. He returned to the city, not as ruler, but as listener. And the city once again began to breathe. Not in sorrow, but in song. Some say the city vanished the next day. That when the sun rose, it found only silence. No towers, no fire, no chains. Others say it still stands, hidden in the folds of sand that move like dreams over ancient bones. That if you walk far enough under moonlight, carrying sorrow as your only companion, you'll hear it. The singing.
Not from voices, but from stone.
But there are also those who believe the city never truly existed in this world. That it was a dream shared by Jinn and man alike, a memory of what could be if grief were ever given the right to speak.
Still one truth remains.
The Jinn King never left. He walks the empty corridors, barefoot still, though the stones have cooled. He tends to the chains, not to bind, but to tune them. Each link a note, each note a prayer, each prayer a piece of history no scripture dares to write. The children who once learned to write in fire now trace names in wind. The fire no longer burns with rage, but with memory. And when the king looks to the heavens, he does not ask for the ring he once wore. He asks for silence. Not the silence of exile, but the sacred kind. The silence that comes after a song has been heard and the singer no longer needs to sing. Because what began in chains did not end in rebellion.
It ended in mercy.
A mercy not granted from above, but grown from below, where from dust, from scar, from remembrance. And that, perhaps, is the truest kind of freedom. For the one who sings in chains but does not curse. For the one who kneels but does not break. For the one who listens even when the heavens turn away. They are the ones the stars remember when they pass through the gate of night. And in their song, a new city is born. There is a place beyond memory, where wind forgets the language of the sky and the stones no longer carry names. A mountain rises there, not in pride but in sorrow, not carved by rivers but by silence. They say this mountain was once spoken by the stars, a name so holy it could not be written, only sung by angels who had never fallen. But now even the heavens pass over it as though it were never born, and yet it remains. Old, alone, waiting. The Jinn King had wandered for years by then. The cities were gone. The flames had cooled. The ring was buried beneath centuries of dust. He walked not as a king but as a witness, each step quiet, each breath heavy with the weight of truths he could no longer tell.
And then he came to the mountain.
No one had told him to come.
No voice had called from above.
But his feet, aching and blistered, knew the way, as though the mountain had once whispered to them in a dream too ancient to recall. The wind did not howl here. It sighed, like an old prophet too tired to curse. The sun did not blaze. It wept, golden tears that kissed the stones without warming them.
And the Jinn?
The Jinn who had followed him through deserts, through chains, through cities that sang in ash. They stopped at the edge of the valley. They would not go further. There was something in the air beneath the shadow of the mountain.
Not fear, not death.
But remembrance,
Too holy to speak.
too heavy to bear. The king turned and faced them, his eyes now pale with age, his crown long since abandoned on the banks of a vanished river. "You do not have to follow me," he said, and no one did. They bowed not in obedience but in grief.
As though they knew this was not a journey one returns from.
He turned back, alone. Up the mountain he climbed, though the stones did not welcome him. They did not move. They did not crack. They did not shine. But they remembered. With every step, the wind grew quieter. The air thinned, not from height, but from holiness, as though each breath required permission. At the halfway mark, he stopped, not because he was tired, but because the ground changed. The soil turned to glass, not smooth, but shattered, as though something once divine had struck the earth and cracked it forever. He knelt, not to pray, but to listen, and beneath the broken glass he heard it. A name, not his own, not the mountain's, but something deeper. A name not made of letters, but of grief, wrapped in glory. It was the name of the one he had once defied, the one who had given him breath, the one he had forgotten.
And suddenly he wept.
Not from pain, but because the mountain remembered what he had spent a lifetime trying to forget. This was not exile. This was return. He laid his forehead to the glass. The mountain did not burn him. It received him. Like a mother who does not forgive but holds anyway. He whispered into the earth, and for the first time in centuries, the mountain responded.
Not in words.
But in warmth, a trembling beneath his bones, a breath under the stone.
As if the earth itself had been holding its silence just for him.
And there, in that hollow place between heaven and dust, the king did not ask for his ring. He did not cry for lost thrones. He asked to be remembered, not as a ruler,
Not as a shadow.
but as one who had heard the silence and did not run. He slept there that night, beneath the stars that dared not name the mountain. And when the dawn came, it did not rise. It bowed. The sky dimmed, as though it too remembered what had been buried here. By morning no tracks remained behind him. The wind had swept them all away, not in malice, but in reverence. It was as though the mountain itself had hidden his path so that no one else would follow, not because they were unworthy, but because some journeys were meant to end in stillness. The Jinn below kept their silence. They did not leave. They did not speak. They watched the summit like it was a wound in the sky, too holy to touch, too terrible to name. And there, at the crown of the world, the king remained. He no longer moved. He no longer aged. The wind passed through him like he was made of vapor and memory. He was not dead. He was not alive. He was becoming something else. Something the earth remembered but the sky had long forgotten. Every morning the sun rose behind him, casting no shadow. Every night the stars gathered above him, but none would say his name. He had once ruled with a ring, commanded winds, bound fire, shaped kingdoms. But here none of that mattered, for the mountain did not care for power. It listened only for silence, and in him it found it, the kind of silence that grows not from absence but from surrender. There are scriptures that speak of this place, fragments, verses carved into tombs no one visits. They speak of a king whose breath was once fire, whose words could split the sky, but who chose, in the end, to become windless.
A servant once more.
To the one he had defied, and perhaps that is why the mountain's name was forgotten.
Not as a punishment, but as a mercy.
For when heaven forgets, it allows the earth to hold something sacred without fear of theft. And so it was. The mountain became his grave, his throne, his altar. It did not echo. It did not speak. It simply waited. And in that waiting, a song began.
Not from his lips,
not from the Jinn, but from the mountain itself. A low, trembling hum that vibrated in the stones, in the veins of the earth, in the bones of those who still listened for what was lost. A sound that said that he remembered, he returned, he bowed. And because he bowed, the mountain was spared. Others would fall, cities, kingdoms, empires that thought they could cage heaven with walls of gold and towers of pride. But the mountain stood, because one had wept upon its crown and asked for nothing but to be seen. No miracles followed, no thunder, no wind, no voice from the clouds, just stillness, just breath. And that perhaps was the miracle. And then one night, when the stars trembled and the wind did not move, a voice came, not loud, not bright,
not as it once had.
It was a thread of sound woven into the mountain's breath, barely a shimmer on the skin of the sky. But the king heard it, not with his ears, they had long since quieted, but with the memory of what breath once was. And the voice did not command, it did not thunder, it did not accuse. It asked one question, soft as rain upon stone. Will you rise? The king did not answer. He did not move. He did not speak. But something shifted deep in the silence of him, and the mountain knew. He would not rise in body, not in fire, not in glory. But he would rise as a remembrance,
a mark upon the veil,
a shape in the silence, a vow buried in stone, so that long after names were forgotten, after kingdoms crumbled, after prophets had passed and stars had fallen, the silence would remain. And in that silence, some would hear it. A whisper, a weight, a warmth, like the memory of a ring no longer worn but never discarded, like the breath before surrender, like the first time a shadow wept in the presence of light. Far below, Solomon's sons would build again. They would raise walls, forge tools,
speak his name as a caution in a legend or a curse.
But none would find him.
None could reach.
For he was not buried. He was not gone. He was written into the mountain, not with stone, but with silence, the kind of silence that does not end. And the mountain, still nameless, stood. It did not boast. It did not beckon. It simply endured, because one king had knelt when no one else dared. And in that kneeling, he had asked for nothing.
And given everything.
He had defied Solomon,
commanded legions,
worn flame and thunder like robes. But in the end, he surrendered not to chains, not to might, but to stillness, to the mercy that waits when power fades, to the whisper that speaks louder than dominion. He gave his name back to the sky, and heaven, in its wisdom, forgot it, so that earth could remember without punishment, so that dust could carry what stars could not. And so now, when the wind brushes your cheek in the night, or a dream comes that feels like fire wrapped in water, you may not know why, but your soul does. It is the mountain speaking. It is the silence remembering. It is the king still kneeling,
still waiting, still there.
And if the silence never broke, would your faith still rise in the dark?
So now, close your eyes.
Let the world dim.
Let the noise unravel. What remains
is older than thought.
It is not memory.
It is not legend. It is something deeper. A silence that once held a throne. You have journeyed with shadows tonight, heard the grief of a forgotten king, witnessed the fire that wept like water,
and stood at the edge of a mountain that does not speak, but remembers everything.
Perhaps you too carry something, not a ring, not a name, but a silence, a stillness in your chest that no sound can comfort. If so, you are not alone. You never were. For every soul that listens without needing an answer, for every heart that still prays after the light has gone, you walk the same path as the king who fell and the prophet who forgave. You are part of the hush that lingers between earth and the veil. So when the wind stirs your window, when the stars seem to burn quietly for you, when you feel something ancient move through your breath, remember this: there was once a king made of flame and defiance, who bowed not to chains, but to God. And in the hush of that surrender, a mountain rose. And if the fire never returns, would you still kneel in the ashes? Sleep now. The story has not ended, and it has only been remembered.